that a moment. So welcome to everybody. And I see that we've got people coming in the door already. Welcome.
Good.
Seeing some familiar names. So, hey, everybody. We'll get started right on the hour. Why don't you open the door so people can start arriving? And it's great to have you here today. And I am calling in from St. Augustine, Florida, where it's lovely. Oh, it's probably about 88 degrees and sunny, and no, 91 degrees. Okay, and I am in the shade, so that's good. It's a nice cool day. But welcome to everybody. And also got Jennifer's here.
Yes.
And also, of course, our presenter, Lexi. So we'll get started right on the hour. And we'll be getting ready in just a moment. So you've got time to get a beverage. Lexi will also remind you, but you can also, there'll be a writing portion to this. So please do. And I see that we've got a raised hand, so I'm going to check that out. If you do have a question, please go ahead and put it in the chat box. We'll be using that in the chat box today. And I'll be monitoring that during Lexi's presentation. So we are 2 minutes till we start. I see more people are coming in. Everybody. Lots of familiar faces. When I can personally say we've got people represented from Minnesota to Texas and from California to New York and all sorts of places in between. Even a shout out from West Virginia and California, like I said. Great. Oh, let's see, we've got about 1 more minute and then I will be turning it over to Jennifer. So welcome everybody. This is Gretchen Jordan. I'm the Association Manager for Alive, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's Alive Academy. And I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, who is our host for today. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Thompson. I am a CPA, but I'm also a board member of Alive, and I want to welcome you to August Alive Academy's webinar. And I'm so happy that you're here today to hear a really great presentation on diversity, equality, inclusion, and volunteer engagement. Just want to go over a few housekeeping real quick. All of you have either probably logged in, you're not having any problems, but if you do have a problem, sometimes like I do, I have to go to my telephone and call in on audio only. But you can always send us a question in the chat box for Gretchen, and she will look at it. Be sure you put it under the presenter only, and she will see if she can help you fix that. So speaking of the chat box, I'm sure all of you have done lots of webinars since the COVID virus thing, but I just want to go over with you a little bit. If you want to talk on that to all the attendants, and we want you to do that, make sure that's the first function that you do. Otherwise, you're going to be talking just to Gretchen and myself, but we want you to talk and communicate with all the rest of the attendees. Gretchen and I will be monitoring the questions, as Gretchen said, as we go along, but I know Lexi has a lot of audience participation in this built into this presentation. So you might have to hold your questions till the end. Today's topic is diversity, equality, and inclusion in volunteer engagement. It's important in today's environment with the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement and recent violence. It has increased the urgency many of us feel to build a more equitable society. Today, you will learn to define and discuss several building blocks of DEI works. You will gain comfort in engaging in dialogue about personal identity, and you will learn about integrating and implementing DEI best practices in your organization and in your volunteer program. Our speaker today is Lexi Bolus. I know I mispronounced that just now. Volunteer coordinator for Tulsa Area United Way. She's also a member of Tulsa Alive, the local organization here. As a volunteer coordinator at United Way, Lexi plans community engagement opportunities for individuals and organizations in Tulsa. She also serves as a staff liaison for the Tulsa Area United Way Diversity and Exclusion Advisory Council. Prior to her current role, Lexi was Teach for America Corps member, where she taught kindergarten and first grade in the Tulsa Public Schools. She holds a bachelor's degree in English with an emphasis in creative writing from Kenyon College. She has 3 years of experience designing and facilitating DEI workshops for educators and nonprofit professionals. These opportunities have empowered individuals to build essential knowledge for equitable work, discuss personal identity, empathize with others, and dismantle systematic oppression. Now I want to turn it over to Lexi, and we'll get started. Welcome, Lexi.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for that introduction. And you got my last name right. So,
oh, good. Good.
You get points for that. So
okay.
I'm gonna switch things over to my presentation. Let's see. Of course, this is the moment that Zoom is going to make things complicated. Here we go. I'll give it a couple minutes to show up. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. I am so excited to be having this conversation with you all and engaging in some much needed DEI work during such a crucial time for these kinds of conversation in our nation's history. So as Jennifer said, my name is Lexi. My personal pronouns are she, her, hers. And before we get into the session today, I'm going to kind of set the stage. And while I'm doing that, I would love for you all to jump into the chat box, introduce yourselves, include your personal pronouns as well. As Jennifer mentioned, this is going to be a very interactive session today. And so getting used to using that chat function and interacting with each other will be a great way to kick us off. So this presentation is really meant to act as a DEI 101 in volunteer engagement. So it's not going to necessarily match where everybody is in their DEI or identity journey, but it's really targeted on, you know, building some of those foundational concepts and starting conversations to be able to build on more in the future. So I also just want to name that I'm not a DEI expert, nobody is. And so all of the information that I'm sharing really comes from my personal experience, my personal learning, and I'm also really looking forward to leveraging all of your knowledge during this presentation. So thank you in advance for participating and sharing. I do also want to name that, of course, race and racism is very much on the top of our minds right now, and that's such an important conversation to be having. At the same time, this presentation is not going to solely focus on race and racial equity, but all identity markers and equity in a broader context. So I just wanted to name that as well. And before we truly dive in today, I did want to just take a moment and pause and recognize the social context that we're all in right now. We are amidst global protests for the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. We are not too long after our current administration has restricted access to healthcare for trans people. And if you're in the United States, you're sitting on land that was stolen from Native American communities. And So I'd like to also give you all an opportunity to think about your local context and give an example. So for me, I am located in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so I'm having this discussion from the endpoint of the Trail of Tears and the home of historic Black Wall Street and the location of the Tulsa Race Massacre in 1921. And of course, at the same time, we do have things to celebrate. Recently, the Supreme Court ruled that individuals in the LGBTQ community cannot be legally discriminated against in their workplace. Cities around the country are tearing down Confederate monuments, and more people than ever have woken up to the reality of racism and other forms of oppression in our country. So I hope that you all were able to take a second and think about your local context and why this work is so relevant to wherever you are tuning in from. These are going to be our desired outcomes for the session. As Jennifer and Gretchen mentioned, we're going to be gaining some knowledge about key definitions in DEI work, again, laying that foundation. We're going to practice and gain comfort with discussing our personal identity, understanding why DEI is so important in volunteer engagement, and talk about some next steps and actionable steps of what you can do for your volunteer program and your organization after this presentation is over. So we're going to start with talking about some group agreements. We're going to ground ourselves in the why and go over those key definitions. And then we're going to go into an activity on personal identity, really an exploration, a self-exploration and a discussion. So that's going to be when you're going to need a piece of paper, a writing device, a phone if that's your thing. I'm a traditional pen and paper kind of person, but you do you. Then after that personal reflection activity, we are going to put that into action, right? And talk about ways to address inequity in your volunteer program and how to create change at your organization. And then we'll have a closing and time for questions. So let's go into our group agreements. So traditionally in one of these types of sessions or any session conversation about DEI, it's really powerful to be able to draft group agreements as a group and have it be very organic and a discussion. Unfortunately, in a Zoom context, we can't really engage in that kind of work. So I've pulled together some common group agreements that really allow for authentic and honest and open discussion. And so what I'm going to do is ask you all to just take a second, read through these group agreements, and if there are any questions on what the group agreements mean, by all means, pop those in the chat. But I'll also kind of go through and give a little bit of an explanation on each of them. So be present, aware, and engaged. Speak your personal truth. So to me, that means, you know, as a woman, for example, I'm not going to speak for the experience of all women. I'm going to speak my personal truth for myself as somebody who identifies as a woman. Assume nothing, ask questions, embrace discomfort. What's said here stays here, but what's learned here leaves here. And expect and accept non-closure. I think that last one is really important, right? In a 90-minute session, there's no way that we can solve all of the problems of inequity and injustice in our society. And sometimes, you know, we want to be able to walk away with all of those answers, and that's simply not possible. So expecting that and accepting that, you know, this is simply a continuation of the journey and one step on the journey and not the end of the journey. So I'm going to ask that everyone goes ahead and puts in the chat one group agreement that you are going to really keep top of mind as we go through our presentation, and one thing that you're going to hold yourself to. So for me, that's going to be embrace discomfort. And so I'll give a couple of moments for others to chime in as well. I see some more embrace discomfort, some asking questions. That's awesome. What's learned here leaves here. Thank you all so much for participating. And so whatever, of course, all of these group agreements are very important in creating an honest and open space for dialogue. But in particular, keep that one that you're going to hold yourself accountable for top of mind as we go through our presentation today. So thank you for engaging in that. So grounding ourselves in the why. I'm sure each of us has our own personal why as to why you tuned in today. If you want to share that in the chat, you're more than welcome to. But in terms of why DEI is so important in volunteer engagement, it's our job to serve everyone in our community and not to exclude or disenfranchise certain groups of people just based on their identity. All of our volunteers should feel welcome, respected, and empowered in our programs. And then in turn, all of the clients that our volunteers are working with should also feel welcome, respected, and empowered. And, we are all part of the solution. We are all responsible for being part of systemic change, no matter where you are in your organization or in your journey. We all have a role to play. So let's launch into some key definitions. First, let's kind of lay out these three main terms. Let's start with diversity. So anyone who has an idea of what diversity means to them, what you see as a definition of diversity, go ahead and put that in the chat, and I'm gonna be able to lift up some responses before we look at a definition together. So what does diversity mean to you, or what do you think about when you see the word diversity? What is your own personal definition of diversity? And I'll give a couple moments for responses to come in. Differences in thought, perspectives, feelings, unique characteristics. I love it. Talking about specific identity markers, absolutely. Different experiences. Great. Yeah, absolutely. Not everybody is the same. Absolutely. So if we're going to look at a definition of diversity, that would be the extent to which a social setting includes broad representation of the individual and social differences in the population from which it focuses its work. So, right, all of those kinds of words that were coming up, different experiences, difference in gender, race, age, everyone is unique, all those sorts of things wrap up into what diversity is. What about inclusion? So if diversity is, the extent to which a group represents different social, different individual identities, what does inclusion mean to you? I see valuing and honoring the personal truth of everyone. Everyone is welcome, valuing different perspectives, respecting differences. Absolutely. Yeah. So it's kind of the next tier, the next step after diversity, right? So now that you have a diverse group, being inclusive is creating a climate where people with different identities, a diverse group, feel valued, and their presence is leveraged to produce better outcomes, right? One of the ways that I think about the difference between diversity and inclusion is, diversity is having different types of people represented at the table, but then inclusion is, everybody actually is allowed to speak and feels welcome at the table. So that distinction is important to make, right? And then what about equity? What do people think about when they hear the term equity? Equal opportunities, yeah, I think that's an important way to think about it, because equity is not the same as equality, right? And we'll get into that in just a little bit, what we don't have in America. Well, that's why we're all here, right? Removing systemic barriers so everyone has the same opportunities to thrive. I love that. Yeah, these are all great ways to be thinking about equity. And if we're talking about equity, we're looking at fairness and justice achieved through systematically assessing and redressing disparities in opportunities and outcomes through targeted actions, right? And I think that that action is very, very important. And you know, the assessing and reassessing and reassessing and sometimes reassessing and being action focused is also very, very important. So now that we've kind of started to dive into what equity means, let's look at the difference between equality, equity, and justice. And some of you all might be familiar with this graphic before. It definitely gets used a lot. One of the versions of this that I've seen really often is with just the first two panels, the equality versus equity. But I love to be able to look at all three panels side by side because that justice piece is so, so important as well. And so I'm not going to read this one to you all, but you can just kind of see visually, right? Like equality means that everyone is getting the same exact support, but not everybody is still able to see the game, right? With equity, different individuals are getting different supports, which means that they're all able to watch the game. However, that barrier is still there, right? And so what justice does is it interrogates, well, why is there a fence there in the first place? Why is the fence not see-through? If the fence was see-through, then nobody would need extra support or accommodation because the inequity, the systemic inequity itself can be altered or changed or even removed. So let's look at a few other key definitions. I think that this is really important to kind of dive into because I see a lot of times, especially the top three definitions are used kind of interchangeably, but they truly do mean different things. And it's so important in DEI work to be able to be very precise with your language and to know exactly what it is you're trying to address and what you're trying to do. So bias, right, is an attitude or a stereotype that can affect our understanding, our actions, and our decisions in an unconscious manner. We are all guilty of having bias. Some of you might be familiar with the term implicit bias. That basically just means that the way that we are socialized and the way that we walk through the world and the way that we learn about the world and about others instills in us those attitudes and those stereotypes, right? And affects the way that we act towards others. And it's often something that we don't even realize, but we are all, no matter who you are, no matter what your identity is, we are all guilty of that, right? Kind of the next step after bias is prejudice. That's an action based on limited information, often on stereotypes. And so prejudice is kind of taking bias maybe a little bit of a step further and taking that action piece, right? Oppression, however, is a systematic subjugation of one social group by a more powerful social group for the social, economic, and political benefit of the more powerful social group. Again, oppression and prejudice and bias are things that are often used very interchangeably, but the heart of oppression is that power imbalance, right? There is one social group that has more power in society or in a particular system than another. Racism and sexism are both forms of oppression and therefore systemic, right? And I think it's just important to call that out because, you know, often we'll hear the terms reverse sexism or reverse racism, and the reason that those things simply do not exist is because racism and sexism are both based in oppression, right? In our society, men have more social power than women. So it is not possible for a woman to oppress a man. It is possible for a woman to have a bias towards a man or prejudice, right? But it is not possible in our society to, for men to face oppression, which is a systemic issue. And then I just really wanted to quickly to call out the definition of privilege, because that's another term that kind of gets tossed around a lot, and people have a very strong reaction when they hear the word privilege, and it can be a difficult conversation to have, right? But privilege is a set of unearned benefits given to people who fit in a specific social group, right? So I am a person who is white, and so I have privilege based on my skin color, because white people in our society are given systemic power over people of color. And so that is a privilege that I have. I didn't earn that. I didn't earn the benefits in society that I get because of my white skin, but it's real and it exists. And so that is a privilege that I have. I want to just pause there and just give time for questions. Gretchen, now is a great time. If there are any questions, we can call those up. If not, we'll go ahead and launch into our personal reflection activity.
No questions specifically, Lexi, but a lot of great comments. So I just put in the chat box and wanted everyone to know that Jared had shared a link, and I'll, if there's anything shared, I will put that in there. And it says this is an interesting interpretation of that equity picture, so I will just save that link for you. But a lot of great comments from Sabrina. One, bias is necessary and unavoidable, but self-awareness is our responsibility in managing our biases so they don't allow us to behave with prejudice and discrimination.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sabrina, for contributing that. And I think that also kind of brings us back to an important distinction between bias, prejudice, and oppression, right? And why it's possible for me as a woman to have a bias against a man, right? But it's not possible for me to oppress a man. And being very mindful of those distinctions, I think, is incredibly important. So thank you.
Yeah, and Sabrina had another great comment too, and I would love to have your interpretation on this.
Sure.
As like an example, sometimes equity is a barrier to fairness.
Yes, thank you for calling that to light. So I would challenge that statement because let me see if I can go backwards on my presentation when I'm presenting. I don't think so. But if you're thinking about that that image of, equity versus equality, equality is kind of the same thing as fairness, right? Everybody is getting the same support. Everybody is standing on the same size box. But is it truly fair that the shorter person still cannot see the game? I guess that depends on your personal experience and your own beliefs. But what I would respond to that is that it's not fair for that person to still be excluded and left out and disenfranchised and not be able to view the game. And calling to light. Does it really cost anything to give that shorter person 2 boxes to stand on, and to give the taller person or the tallest of the 3 no boxes to stand on because they can see the game just fine without the box? Does that really cost us anything? Does that really make it not a fair situation? I would say no, but again, different folks will have different opinions and different views on that. Does that kind of speak to what you were hoping to, Gretchen?
Yes, for me. And yes, and Sabrina says, I think we're saying the same thing, Lexi. And
awesome. Yeah.
Brenda
But
says,
that's a great thing to bring up. So thank you so much for that.
And the differences are okay. That's what
absolutely. Yeah. People, you know, absolutely. We're all different, and that's a great thing. So, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and move into our identity wheel activity. So this is going to be when you're going to need a writing device, a piece of paper, if you're a tech person, possibly your phone. And we are going to do kind of a personal reflection activity. So before I really launch into that, though, I just want to give folks a chance to look at this identity wheel, think about these different identity markers, and if there are any questions about a definition or a distinction or a difference between any of these personal identity markers, please ask. I will just say one common question is, what is the difference between race and ethnicity? And so that's a challenging question to answer, right? Because both race and ethnicity are social constructs and things that we have created. So it's a difficult question to answer because there's no hard and fast rule or line or distinction between those two things, because they are, right, things that people have made up. But kind of the way that helps me think about it is that race is usually linked to physical characteristics such as skin color, hair texture, those sorts of things. And it is one or more social group with which a person can identify, whereas ethnicity is linked with cultural expression, identification, heritage, those types of things. Besides that question, if there are any questions on what any of these identity markers mean, or if you're unsure of how you would respond to filling out your own, please put those in the chat. But I'm going to go ahead and my group agreement that I promised I would hold myself to was embracing discomfort. So I'm going to do a little bit of that right now and show you all my filled out personal identity wheel. And I hope that this also kind of gives you all a little bit of just an example of how you would fill out your own. So we're going to go ahead and take, let's start with 2 minutes. And I'm gonna set a timer, and just, whether it's a list on your phone or if you want to draw out this circle yourself, whichever works best for you. And we're just going to have a couple minutes of quiet personal reflection time for you to be able to write down each of your identity markers based on these categories. So let's do that now. Okay, so that was about 2 minutes. That probably felt really, really comfortable. If, like me, you're an introvert and all of the extroverts are probably like, okay, when's she gonna start talking again? So I just want to do a pulse check. If there's a large number of people who need more time to fill out their own identity wheel, we can certainly do that. And if not, we're going to go ahead and launch into the discussion and activities. So if you are desperately needing more time and you do not want us to start yet, please say so in the chat. If not, I'm going to continue forward. So I will pause again just for a moment and see if anybody needs more time. And I have paused, so we're gonna keep going. All right, thank you so much, everybody, for engaging in some quiet reflection time. So now that you've all filled out your own identity wheels, we're going to go through an activity that gives us an opportunity to practice talking about identity. You know, we're often socialized not to talk about things like race or gender or sexuality, and it makes it really difficult to have these kinds of conversations. However, you know, I think it's so crucial in DEI work not only to, you know those key definitions and to know what you can do in your own, workplace or in your own personal life, to advance equity and justice in your spheres. But it's really important to do the self work alongside that. And so this is really a step in allowing all of us to do that together. And in reality, not talking about things like race and gender is exactly, kind of the building blocks from which bias and prejudice and oppression are built. And so as we're trying to dismantle those types of systems, it's really important to just have open, honest dialogue, true dialogue about these kinds of things. So if you're like me and you named embrace discomfort as one of your group agreements, now is an awesome time to lean into that. But even if you didn't, still an awesome time to lean into discomfort here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of these 4 discussion questions, and I am going to ask everyone who feels comfortable doing so to put their answers in the chat. So let's just start with question number 1 right now. So what are the identities that you think about the most often? And again, the goal of this exercise is to just practice and build up comfort with discussing identity. There's no judgment, there's no assumptions, right? Assume nothing, ask questions based on what your responses are. So if you are comfortable, go ahead and put in the chat, what are the identities that you think about the most often? And I will participate in that. And if you feel comfortable either using the category for the for the identity, or you can either put the actual identity, whatever your level of comfort with that is. Okay, so I'm seeing lots of different responses. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm seeing gender come up a lot, race come up a lot. And as you're putting those responses in, again, embrace discomfort as much or as little feels right for you. But if you also want to put, just kind of take a moment to pause and interrogate yourself a little bit. Why are those the identities that you think about the most often? So I will say for myself, one of the identities that I think about most often is my gender as a woman. And that is because, as we kind of discussed earlier, women do not have privilege in society. And I personally, in my life, have faced a lot of challenging situations, a lot of dangerous situations because of my identity as a woman. And so that is something that I think about pretty much on a daily basis as I'm going through my everyday life. And so if you want to share in the chat, why you think about that identity the most, you are more than welcome to do so. But if not, just do that kind of self-interrogation and think about, oh, why do I think about my race or my socioeconomic status or my physical ability? So I'm seeing some great responses. And so as you're asking yourself that, one of the things that I will kind of name is that often, as with my example, being a woman is something that I think about pretty much on a daily basis. Is often we think about the identities that do not give us privilege in society, right? So as a kind of counterexample to that, I do not think about my first language very often, because living in the United States and being a native English speaker, I don't have to think about that because it gives me a lot of privilege. So yeah, I'm seeing some great reflections. Thank you everybody for embracing discomfort. And yeah, so I'm kind of seeing that same theme come up, thinking about physical ability. If maybe you're in a life situation where, like Dana shared, you might have to wear a medical device, or yeah, I think religion or a spiritual affiliation, that's definitely something that a lot of people think about a lot if you do have a strong religious or spiritual affiliation, because it does really color how you see the world. Jared, I really relate to your comment, so thank you for sharing that. So as we're sharing kind of some of those responses, let's go ahead and move on to question number 2. What are the identities that you think about the least often? And so I already shared, first language is one of mine that I hardly ever think about unless I'm somehow confronted with it. Because I am from the United States, I live in the United States, English was my first language. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to worry about it. Yeah, so I'm seeing some first language, some national origin. Those are definitely some of mine as well. And again, as you're sharing, if you're comfortable sharing, why, kind of do some of that self-interrogation of why do you think about that the least often? And then kind of another layer on top of that, ask yourself, do I think about this the least often because I'm privileged in this area, as with my example. So I'm seeing some more responses come in, a couple religions. A couple socioeconomic status. More national origin, more first language, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm gonna make an assumption here, which I shouldn't, but unfortunately we're not all in a room together having this conversation. So I'm gonna assume that all of my fellow first language people out there are also English speakers in the United States. So you can kind of relate to what I shared earlier. Yeah, I'm able to communicate easily with most people. Absolutely. Yeah, Sabrina, thank you for your comment. I'm glad that this kind of sparked some of that thinking for you. Let's go ahead and move on to the third question. This is kind of one of my favorite questions to think about because I think it's a great opportunity for personal growth and personal reflection and really continuing your personal identity journey. And I'd love for everybody to share what is one aspect of your identity that you would like to learn more about. I would probably share from a personal side, back in college, I would have shared that sexual orientation was one of mine because I was discovering that I actually do not identify as heterosexual. So that's something that I would have shared then. I think today, I would probably share that I am constantly on a journey of wanting to learn more about my race and how that filters the way that I walk through the world and gives me privilege, and what role I should be playing in the fight for racial equity as a white person. So if you want to share your answer to number 3, what is one of the identities or multiple identities that you want to learn more about? And then maybe ask yourself, how would you go about that?
So Lexi, I just want to clarify, you're talking about in this wheel, what we'd like to learn more about our own identities or someone else's identities?
Your own. Thank you, Gretchen, for clarifying that. Yeah, your own identities. So looking at your identity wheel, or if you made a list on your piece of paper, like what is one of your identities that you want to learn more about for yourself? Thank you, Gerald, for sharing. Yeah, Paula, I think that's a great response. How can I be mindful of how the unearned privilege I've been granted harms others? That's something that I'm constantly doing as well. So thank you for raising that up. And Hannah, that's certainly something that I relate to as well, on the sexual orientation identity. Sabrina, thank you for sharing. And then that kind of is a natural lead into question number 4. What are some of the identities that have the strongest effect on how you see yourself as a person? So for me, I would definitely say gender, race, sexual orientation are kind of my big 3, you know, that have the strongest effect on how I see myself as a person. And again, to kind of embrace some discomfort there, a couple years ago, I would not have included race in that category because I was very unaware of my white privilege. And that's a lot of work that I've had to do over the past several years. And so I've come to a place now where my race as a white person does very much strongly affect how I see myself as a person. And there's still always more work to do around that. Charity, thank you for sharing that as well. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people include race for their response to question number 4 about how they see themselves as a person. First language. I'll just give us kind of a couple minutes more to continue in some of this dialogue. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating and leaning into that discomfort. Or maybe this is very comfortable for you, and that is awesome too. So as we're wrapping up, you know, please kind of make notes for yourself about how, you know, you're going to continue working on some of this. You know, maybe you called out, so like for me, I called out first language for my response to number 2, something that I think about the least often. So maybe I could sit and think about, and I am honestly sitting and thinking about, you know, how can I be more mindful of my privilege of being a native English speaker in the United States? And so kind of just check in with yourself a little bit, kind of question, And I am really loving all of these responses and just open, honest reflection. Thank you so much, everybody. Gerald and Karen and Gretchen. And so, yeah, Gretchen, this is a great moment to pause for some reflection point. And I would love for people to share, you know, how did that activity feel for you? Was it comfortable, uncomfortable? What did it make you think about? What might you want to learn more about? And then this is also a great pausing point for questions. If anybody has any questions, please do raise those up now. So Gretchen, did I miss any questions in the chat as we were going through that activity?
No, but I want to thank everybody for sharing all these comments, and it's, you know, I would love for us to all be in a room in person.
I know, wouldn't that be lovely? Yeah, I've really learned a lot being able to scroll through comments, and I think it's really powerful to be able to see all of these responses and people being so honest and vulnerable. Gerald, I do want to raise up your comment about your answers being different on another day. I mean, that's absolutely something I've experienced as someone who has either participated or facilitated this session many times. My answers are constantly changing based on, you know, what's going on in the world at that time, or maybe I just read a really good book about something in particular and now I'm thinking about it a lot. And I think that's one of the really cool things about a personal reflection activity like this, is being able to constantly check in with yourself and interrogate you know, how you think about yourself. And yes, that intersectional piece as well. Absolutely. That's kind of more of like a DEI 201 session. So we're not going to dive too deep into intersectionality today, but yes, that is a conversation that I love as well. So if there are not any other questions, Gretchen, again, I'm just going to check in before we move on. Was there anything that I missed questions wise?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, lovely. And I really appreciate all of the comments and responses on the activity. I love doing this activity just with myself, even on my own time. And so these slides will be available after the presentation so that you can constantly be checking in with yourself and doing some more of that self-work as you go through your identity journey. So I certainly encourage you to do that.
And Lexi, I just wanted to say earlier, I had said I would save, excuse me, any resources shared, but I'm not going to be saving these comments and sharing back out, because that's part of what, you know, what we said here stays here. But I probably will send you that one link if you wanted to add it to your presentation so people would have it.
Yes, I can definitely add that. I do have a resources slide at the end, so any links or anything that's shared, I can add that to the resources slide so that it's included when it's shared out. But thank you, Gretchen, for honoring our "what's said here stays here" group agreement. That's really, really vital, so thank you. So now that we've had some time to do some self-work and some personal reflection, I'm a person of action as much as I love to get into the mindset and the head and all of that kind of stuff with this work. I think it is also important, no matter where you are in your identity journey, what you've learned, what you still have left to learn, that, you know, we all kind of are focused on action and next steps and those sorts of things. So I would love to hear also, the interaction in this session has not ended, even though the personal reflection activity was certainly the most interactive portion of this session. But please still at any point put questions in the chat, put your own thoughts, comments, responses, and we can keep up that dialogue as much as possible. So in terms of some, you know, action next steps, let's look at some of the ways that, you know, that we all can address inequity in our volunteer program. And this is certainly a point where I would love to share other people's thoughts, maybe something you've already done, something you've already tried, and leverage sort of our shared knowledge so that we can all learn and grow together. But some of the next steps that you can absolutely take as soon as you get off of this call is being honest and reflective, just like you were in that personal reflection activity. I mean, like, I feel very humbled by the openness and the honesty that was part of that discussion. So I'm just going to say thank you again for engaging in that way. But, you know, don't leave that here when the Zoom meeting is over. Take that back to your organization and continue those kinds of conversations, because it's so important, right? And take that to your volunteers as well, because it truly can impact and change how they interact with your clients and with your community. Always be open to learning more and changing your opinions and your views. This is a good thing. Review your policies and procedures. You know, where do you find inequities, or, you know, maybe some of those unconscious or implicit biases playing out in your policies and procedures for your volunteer program. And, you know, really take that next step of advocating for change. If you see something that is an inequity playing out in your volunteer program or in your organization as a whole, do something, advocate, make that change happen. You can do it. You know, consider providing DEI, formal DEI training to your volunteers. It's so crucial to be able to have these kinds of conversations with your volunteers and ensure that they are, you know, interacting with your clients in an equity-minded and justice-minded way. Develop a community-centric outreach plan and think about how you can volunteer with the community instead of for the community. And we will dive a little bit deeper into what exactly that means in just a second. So in terms of putting DEI into practice, reviewing policies and procedure, let's kind of dive deeper into one of those ways that you can address inequity in your volunteer programs. So ask yourself, does your organization have a diversity policy or an equal opportunity statement for your volunteers? I'm certain that it has one for staff, but does that extend to your volunteers as well? Because, right, volunteers are not paid staff. And if it does, who's included in that policy or that statement? Who's excluded? Who are you not considering, or who are you unintentionally leaving out of that policy or statement if you have one? So we're going to do just like a short little mini workshop here, and I have 2 DEI centered policies for volunteers, and I would love to hear comments, responses, thoughts on each of these policies. And this is not like a example B is the good one and example A is the bad one, or vice versa. These are just, let's take them each individually. It's not a trick, I promise. But truly, I would love to just kind of be able to look at a statement together and maybe do a little mini workshop on it. Oops, and I put both of them up, but that's okay. So statement number 1, I'm not going to read it. I'll just give you all time to read it a little bit and kind of question, you know, who's left out of this? Who would this maybe not be reaching? Does this go far enough? Does this go too far? And whether you feel like you want to pop in the chat and give some of your reflections or comments, that's great. Or if you just want to kind of think on that on your own. Hannah, I think that's a really strong reflection. You know, Hannah's comment is that they have policy language in the handbook, but it feels very legalistic, which in my mind says kind of stale. Maybe that's what you're going for and not necessarily centered on inclusivity. That's certainly something to interrogate. Absolutely. Yeah, Paula, it seems this statement seems focused on not discriminating, to be able to maybe check a box and make sure that they're all within legal guidelines, but not really focused on equity or being truly inclusive. I would certainly agree with that assessment. And I'm seeing a few folks call out maybe some groups that are left out of this statement. Absolutely. Yeah, and Mara, I apologize if I did not say your name correctly. The inequity in being able to volunteer is certainly something to call out as well. And we can kind of have that conversation on the next slide when we're talking about volunteering for versus volunteering with. So here's another statement. And maybe we could ask ourselves, you know, does this statement address some of the things that we found were missing in the first statement, whether that's, you know, specific groups of people, or maybe this one could potentially feel a little bit less like it's just trying to check a box and fit within some legal guidelines, and maybe this one still feels that way, or maybe this one, you know, feels like, oh, like this organization really truly does want to have an equitable and diverse and inclusive environment for volunteers. Again, this is not a, you know, pick A or B, which one is better kind of thing, but I think some of us might find that we feel inclined to say that one statement is more inclusive or more equity focused than another. Yeah, so there definitely is different language in this one. It might feel more inclusive. It calls out some specific groups that are being actively welcomed into this volunteer program. It's an improvement, but could still use tweaking. Absolutely. Feels more intentional. I would agree with that. And I would love to hear, what do you think of, what about it do you think makes it feel more intentional than the first one, which we kind of, the consensus was that it's just trying to check a box and be legally compliant. Melissa, I think that's a good question in terms of, does having a list actually make it more restrictive? I think there are a couple of layers to that from a DEI perspective. My response would be yes and no, because right, whenever you make a list, there's almost certainly going to be someone who feels left out, or who is left out, you know, as we saw in the first statement. And at the same time, I do think there is power in specifically naming and calling out, you know, those groups that you are actively, you know, seeking and welcoming. And, you know, as long as you're sort of open to having that be kind of a constantly evolving group or list, then, you know, that can be a good thing. I think I'm not an HR professional, but I think from an HR perspective, there are certainly some things that, again, are legally required in statements like these. You know, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, right, the Supreme Court recently ruled that you can't discriminate based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So I think, unfortunately, some of these things do kind of get caught up in the legality and all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, I really appreciate the conversation that's coming out of this. And I think that's something that we can all interrogate and think about. Absolutely. And I love to see that there are folks who are looking at their own statements and being like, oh, is this actually inclusive? Is this actually equitable? That's fantastic. So thank you for engaging in that way. I'm going to move on to another way that you can put DEI into practice at your volunteer program. And that's sort of understanding this concept of volunteering for versus volunteering with. Oftentimes, volunteer programs kind of fall into this volunteering for mindset and model. And I do want to just name, though, as we're going through this, that, you know, if you feel like your volunteer program is falling more into the volunteering for category than the volunteering with category, that does not mean that your volunteer program is horrible and you're not doing a good job and you're not helping the community or anything like that. That is absolutely not what this means. This is just sort of calling out some potential and common pitfalls of the volunteering for model. But it absolutely does not mean that you cannot grow and do more. It does mean that maybe you have an opportunity for some of that growth and more that you can do to embrace a community-centric model for your volunteer program. And so oftentimes if a volunteer program is falling more into that volunteering for model, the volunteers do not reflect the identities and the diversity of the community that's being served. It perpetuates systemic inequity. You're going to see that white savior complex pop up. And just to dive just really quickly into what that means. So the white savior complex is when a privileged individual engages with folks in a marginalized or an oppressed group with the mindset that they need to save or that they need to fix that group. And almost always the privileged individual believes that only they know how to, like, quote unquote, improve that community that they're claiming to be serving, rather than engaging in genuine, authentic dialogue with the group and that community, and, you know, learning from them, learning from their own leaders, learning from individuals in that community what they need and what they want and how to help and how to serve. It can also lead to some separation between the volunteers and the community, and it's often based in kind of a deficit-based model. That just kind of means that, you know, people, again, calling back to the white savior complex, that there's something that needs to be saved or something that needs to be fixed about the group, rather than recognizing all of the amazing work that's already happening within the community. If you're striving to move towards a volunteering with model in your volunteer program, your volunteers are going to reflect the identities and the diversity of the community that you're working with. It'll allow to kind of level some of those power dynamics and build authentic relationships across lines of difference to increase collective impact. It follows more of a community-wide collaboration model, and it's more asset-based. And so this is not to, again, to say that it's like wrong or that you shouldn't recruit volunteers from outside of the communities that your clients are from. In fact, one of the really amazing things that we get to do as volunteer engagement professionals is bring together folks from different walks of life, different experiences, different identities, and that can truly enact such powerful, positive change in our larger communities. But only if it's done in an equitable and justice-focused way, and you're truly committed to embracing and integrating those DEI practices and mindsets into your volunteer program. Otherwise, you run the risk of kind of feeding into that white savior complex and all of those sorts of things. And so, you know, the goal of equity and justice centered work is to dismantle oppression and break down those power structures. And so if you're not giving voice, for example, or agency or power to oppressed and marginalized groups and recognizing the leaders and the thinkers and the doers that are already in that community, which is what you're doing if you're working in an asset-based model or volunteering with, then, you know, if you're going and saying, oh, well, we're going to do this for you or even to you, and not, you know, truly collaborating with and working alongside that community, and you're working from a deficit-based model of, oh, well, they don't have this, so we're going to give it to them, that can further perpetuate some of those systemic inequities. So let's look at even just a slightly broader picture, and how can you enact change at your organization as a volunteer engagement professional? And so not just looking at the volunteer program anymore, but organization wide, right? We all have the opportunity to be part of the solution, no matter what your role is in your organization. And it doesn't matter if you're a director, a VP, on the leadership team, wherever you are in the hierarchy, you can be part of the solution. And in fact, if you're not actively working to be part of the solution, you can fall into that pitfall of being part of the problem, and not on purpose, but continuing to perpetuate some of those systemic inequities that we have been discussing. Structural problems require structural solutions, and we're all, part of the structure within our organizations. And so we all have the responsibility and the power and the opportunity to bring about some of that change and some of those solutions. And just always keeping in mind that we never fully arrive. We never finish this work. I'm not done. None of you are done. Sorry to tell you. And, it's always a process, always learning, always growing. And to me, that's really exciting. It can also be scary, but it's also, looking at it as an opportunity for continued growth and learning. So again, I would love to be able to leave you all with some immediate actions that you can take once you're done with this webinar. And I hope that this is not all that you take with you back to your organizations, but certainly if you're kind of feeling lost, if in the theoretics and all of that kind of stuff, this is a really great way to kind of ground yourself and take some immediate action at your organization. So don't be afraid to start the conversation. If you're kind of looking around and nobody's really having this conversation, don't be afraid to be the first one to have it. Again, as volunteer engagement professionals, we are kind of in this really unique situation in our organizations where we are working with our communities in a different way than perhaps some others in our organization are. Right, we're interfacing with volunteers who in turn are working with clients, and so there's multiple layers there, right, and some really powerful work that we can do in our field to be able to bring about really concrete and really powerful change in our organization. So don't be afraid to be the first person to speak up. And review your policies and procedures, start a DEI committee at your organization or within your volunteer group. That can also be really powerful. And provide volunteers an opportunity to give feedback. This is a really important one because oftentimes, we have always volunteers come and go out of our program, but if you don't have an opportunity or an avenue for them to give feedback, you might not know why they're leaving. And maybe there is something about the system of your volunteer program that is resulting in an inequitable experience for your volunteers. And so providing an opportunity for feedback gives them the space to be able to say, well, I had this experience, and as a woman, it made me feel this way, and so I don't feel included in this organization. And that's an awesome learning moment for you to be able to go back and start the conversation, review your policies and procedures, and put some of these other things into action. And just don't forget that small changes can make a big impact. Things like having an all-gender bathroom at your organization. I mean, you might unintentionally be excluding an entire group of people just because, they walk into your organization once and they look around and say, well, if I need to take a bathroom break in the middle of my volunteer shift, there's nowhere for me to go, so I can't be here. And, you could be really losing out on such a wonderful volunteer in your program. And so some of these things, are truly just little changes that can create a big impact in the equity and the inclusivity of your volunteer program and in your organization as a whole. So if you have more ideas, again, things that you've done, things that you've tried in your volunteer program, please include those in the chat. And
Lexi, this is Gretchen. I'll just share something quickly that
yeah.
at a live through a request from a member was to include the honorific MX dot, and I'll put that in the chat box. And
yes,
I had, to be honest, I had not heard of that honorific, and so she explained it. It's been in the dictionary for several years now, but it's just a way for someone to identify that doesn't want to identify as a certain gender, and you know, so we had that changed on our new member and our event registration. So you may see that. So that's another great small change to, take that small step.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. And it's just been great to fill that in and just help spread awareness. And many people I've talked to about this had no idea and thought, well, that's a great way to be able to just be more inclusive in that way.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. So then to wrap us up, I kind of want to revisit our group agreements here. Many of us put in the chat way back at the beginning of the presentation, one specific group agreement that you wanted to hold yourself to. So this is an opportunity for you to check in with yourself, right? DEI work is constantly about personal reflection, checking in with yourself, questioning yourself, those sorts of things. So let's practice a little bit of that here. Check back in with yourself and, ask, was the group agreement that you said that you would hold yourself to more than any of the others? Did you follow through on that? Did you fall short? If you fell short, what could you have done differently? Just check in with yourself. If you feel compelled to put something in the chat, you are more than welcome to. Totally not obligatory. So I'll just pause here for a moment so everybody can have the chance to read over the group agreements one more time. And then here are some resources. You are more than welcome to email me with any questions or follow-up conversation. If it's not apparent, I absolutely love talking about identity and having these kinds of conversations. So it will truly make my day if you email me with questions or just wanting to continue the conversation. I can absolutely update the resources slide with other things that were shared during the presentation. And if not, let's go ahead, and this is kind of the final pausing point. If there are any questions, Gretchen, we can have some time for discussion now, and I finished 15 whole minutes early.
Great. I would just say it would be great to discuss, some suggestions or ways that we can make sure that we're looking at this, but also considering, what are the true needs of, the clients or, serving the mission of the organization, and how can we make sure that this DEI work isn't, bringing on any additional barriers to that mission being accomplished. So for example, if we have an after-school program, and someone had mentioned that earlier, people need to work during the day and then they can't volunteer for this after-school program. How can we, come to a good place where we don't feel terrible about it? I mean, if it is what it is, how do we? Suggestions. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's critical to be asking yourself, and I think that is truly like very individualized based on your local context, your community, your organization. So that's certainly not something that I can give like a canned response to. But yeah, I think what you mentioned in terms of, going back to the mission of your organization, thinking about your local context, both historically, currently, you know, the diversity of your community that you're working with, is absolutely critical in a lot of this work. So I wish I had more of a concrete answer to be able to give to that, but all I would be able to really do with any amount of authority is speak to my own local context, because I can't speak for others in that space.
Oh, that's okay. And I just going back to a few slides ago when you shared those two statements about, you know, discrimination and how the second one would be a much better fit. But, you know, I think there are times within a program when you have to say, these are the needs of, you know, to fulfill our mission. And we're going to try to be as accepting as possible, but there may be times when it just may not be a good fit, and it doesn't have to do with discrimination. It's just a matter of being able to fulfill the role.
Sure, yeah. And then I think, you know, one way that you could challenge yourself in that is, you know, well, what else could this volunteer do with us? If they're not able to make that after school time, are they able to, you know, come in before the after school program and prepare packets or kits or materials, you know, just as an example, like what are things that we still need to be done and that a volunteer could do, and, you know, still be able to include them in your program.
Yeah, exactly. And Hannah had a great comment to that, so thank you.
Lexi, this is Jennifer. I think, you know, too, we have to really be careful nowadays, because with all the COBA and the policies, that we're not putting up more barriers for volunteers than we absolutely need to. Again, it goes back to maybe there is a volunteer who doesn't want to wear a mask. Okay, so are we going to eliminate them, or are we going to try to find something virtual for them? You know, I have, as a white person, I have this problem of sometimes getting into African American groups to talk about volunteering, because all they see is I'm white. So how, you know, I've got to learn how to break those barriers down on a positive note and not a negative note. So I think it, you know, it's one of those things. And living in Tulsa with all the different ethnic groups that we have, my kids grew up in a minority school in California. They learned from the very beginning what it was like to be a minority. And so they don't have those biases, those prejudices, with different groups. But that, you know, that a lot of kids, if you're going, you know, if you only got a white, because when I lived and grew up in Tulsa and was in high school, all white schools, all black schools. They did not have, there was no integration whatsoever. So it was really a big deal in this town, I can tell you, when that went in. So again, we come a long ways, but we still have so much work that we have to do. And I just think we have to take baby steps. Each one of us has to take baby steps, but reflecting on who we are and where we are.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jennifer. And one thing that I want to kind of lift up from what you just shared is, you know, one of the essential components of working across lines of difference is building those authentic relationships with people, right? And, you know, as a white person walking into a room exclusively with people of color and being able to acknowledge, you know, I don't understand your lived experience. I never will. And let's work together to try to build as much understanding as possible so that we can all work together to, you know, towards this common goal, or, you know, go back to the mission of your organization and what you're trying to accomplish together as a larger community, and being able to have those open and honest conversations and build authentic relationships is absolutely critical. So thank you for bringing that up. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so Jennifer can take over, but I believe we still have some more time for questions.
All right, Gretchen, are you ready for me to, back to our, anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask Lexi? Lexi, I'm sure you'll get some emails with questions because we all think about it after we get off
Yes,
every
I hope
webinar.
so. I hope I get some emails. That would be fantastic.
Because it's so much information going in, and sometimes it takes us a little longer to just, disseminate it.
Absolutely. Yes.
But thank you so much. I
Thank
told
you.
you all this would be a great presentation, and she delivered. So thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Got a
Ms.
couple
Griff,
of announcements for
yes.
everybody before we go.
Yeah, we do. Our newsletter is out for August, and please go and look at it because there's a lot of great information about it in there that you can find, and some other webinars get done by different other organizations that we are worked with. So save the date for the next Academy, which is September 25th. It's with the topics to be announced. I think it was being discussed today, and so it should be out shortly. If you have a topic that you would like to present in 2020, please send that information to is it manager@volunteeralive.org, I believe, is the website to send it to, because we would love to have any of you present on a topic that you feel it really would reach out to. This has been a great group today. You also, too, if you are interested in becoming more involved with Alive, the committee positions are always open in membership and marketing and programming. You can see the newsletter for that. Of course, there's our website. It's www.volunteeralive.org, where you can, there's a resource page there, there's other information and things like that. The Impact Award, this is very special to me because I'm the chair of this committee. The Impact Award. Impact Awards are to recognize us. It's to recognize our peers. It's to recognize ourselves and honor ourselves as being totally wonderful professionals, each and every one of us are. So that nominations are open for that. You can nominate yourself, or you may have somebody nominate you. I suggest maybe having a volunteer nominate you. I would love to see what volunteers have to say about some of our volunteer professionals out there. It's open until September 14th, and the winners will be honored at the next thing on the list, which is the hybrid conference, which is October 20th and 21st. Gretchen, fill me in, are we still mostly virtual, or if they can have a room together, they can,
Yes.
vice versa?
And I would just direct folks to go to our website to learn more, or to contact me if they would like specific information.
Right. And the 20th is for the Pacific and Mountain region, and the 21st is for the Central and Eastern region of the United States. So we are so glad that you all came, and I hope that I'd like to see nominations from every one of you who attended today. That would be so awesome. So again, we want to thank the Sterling volunteers for their support this year in expanding our online webinars so that you and members and your colleagues can get the great information and the presentations like you heard today. So if you want to thank them, go to that website that was on there. And I want to thank Gretchen and Paula. Paula is our Alive program and advocacy coordinator. I want to thank that, and Gretchen, who is our administrative manager, for all the hard work they put in for doing these webinars today. And I want to thank each and every one of you for coming. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you in the future, I am sure. So thank you so much. Are we leaving, Gretchen? Are we off?
I will go ahead and end the webinar now, and just want to wish everybody a happy Friday, and thank you very much for the work that you do, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month, if not sooner.
Thank you so much, guys. Oh, God.